It is my great pleasure to introduce to you Linda Egnatz, who is a former, or I guess she always will be, a National Teacher of the Year, but is currently the Executive Director of the Global Seal of Biliteracy. This Global Seal of Biliteracy is a demonstration of just how far this country has come in terms of creating a recognition of language skills and the value of language skills. And in addition, just to show us how far you can come from a small town in Illinois to become a director of a national initiative when you have passion and wisdom and simply don't mind working hard hours to make good things happen. So with that, I'd like to introduce Linda Egnatz. You can read more about her on your information sheet, but please help me welcome her today.
Thank you, Dina. It's really a pleasure to be here for so many reasons and at so many levels. And I'm really excited to share not just this opportunity with you, but to really sort of share in your journey, because you, as a state and certainly as a group of, as a community of passionate language compatriots, are really working on a project that I am also following and certainly cheering you on for. So I really want to talk to you about the idea of language credentials and the idea of why we truly need not just to recognize language in terms of multilinguals, but why we want to talk about highly proficient language users and the need for them and how they need, why the idea of credentialing is really, really important. And this comes really from the idea of your own language roadmap. And it's one that I've been following since I was introduced to it in 2016, when I was able to join you for your second symposium at that time as an advocate for the state seals of biliteracy. I became involved in the State Seal of Biliteracy movement in 2012 and was a real strong advocate in my own state of Illinois. And part of that process in 2013, we became state number 3 to have a state seal. And I've worked passionately to support other states because it's important that at the government level, the State Seal of Biliteracy is the first time that in U.S. history we have recognized the importance of being bilingual and documenting that and recognizing that at a national, state, and national level. And right now in the state, we have that at the state legislation level, but in the national level right now, we're moving to the BEST Act, which is at the national level recognizing funding to support that. And so we really, it's very important that as language advocates, we support those pieces of legislation because they are, it's the first time that we are saying it is important to be multilingual. And so as an early advocator, the state of Hawaii is really a big part of that success. And this is a part of your original sort of roadmap. And I'm going to be referencing that 2013 document a few different times. First of all, you initiated this document to say that you wanted to develop a world-class workforce that serves the language needs of your community. That it was important to support the growing needs of local as well as global business, that you wanted to facilitate the demands that were placed on your state and local government agencies, and we heard a lot about that this morning from the different agencies that were represented here, and that you wanted to fuel the economic aspirations of Hawaii. I was excited as I started preparing for this presentation today to do a little bit of research, and I've just already learned that when I was here, you were just going to initiate the very first state seals of Hawaii, biliteracy for Hawaii, and that you've issued now 430 of them. I'm so excited. Yes, yes. So I was really excited about that. And you'll see that that number is going to continue to grow because it feeds itself. Students are excited to get those awards and to be recognized for their efforts. And parents are excited not only to see their students acquire another language, but to be recognized and honored and respected for the home languages that they speak. And so that's a really important honor, and you should be very proud and thrilled for those students that are being recognized, because that is the starting point. And so in that roadmap, you also identified 3 assets that the state of Hawaii has. You talked about your people asset. You identified your linguistic assets as a multilingual state. You talked about your economic assets, and you talked about your educational assets. And those are the 3 pieces that I want to share with you and how I believe the Global Seal of Biliteracy can support and complement each of those 3 pieces. Your linguistic assets. We all know that you're diverse. You know it. We've talked about it all morning, about the multilingual capacity that this state has, but I thought maybe you'd like to see it as you compare to other states. This data comes from 2017, and if you look at the very bottom where it talks about the most diversified as being this sort of tealish blue, and orange as being the least diversified, the state of Hawaii comes in at the second to the deepest blue shade there. So you are very, very diversified in terms of the states. And so as a population that speaks another language, and when you consider the size of the state of Hawaii, that's pretty, if we looked at it per capita, you probably would take number 1. And so again, you are in fact not only a diverse state and a multilingual state, but you have those assets in a very small space, and they need to be celebrated. Economic assets that make Hawaii unique. Well, just look out the beautiful window. You have an incredible asset in terms of your just the beauty that is here. Obviously, you attract a number of tourists, quite a large number of them. You have this space and the geographic asset of being a kind of port and a sort of stopping place between the mainland and Asia. You have the economic asset then of that being port. You have agriculture. There are these pieces that have created a unique environment for you, and you're aware of them. You have the military assets. You have all of the military bases here, the rich history, as well as some of the other pieces that come along with those military assets economically. And you have the rich education assets that we've been talking about, whether it is your K-12 immersion programs, whether it is the 11 different languages that are taught, whether it's your university programs and the different programs that are offered in those. So yeah, you have those 3 assets. And so we want to think about how do they not only reflect the multilingual components, but how can they also be maximized in terms of language? How can these pieces begin to kind of work together? And what I think they can do is they can begin to work together by to solve these community solutions or community problems that we talked about earlier, and that language credentials can kind of bring them together to create some community solutions. And so that's what we want to think about, is how do we, because that was really the challenge, and we had the whole board over there in the corner of challenges. And when I started over here in this group, and I thought, wow, we didn't come up with very many, and when we looked over it very jealously at all of those pieces of paper, and then we realized, oh, well, you had the challenges. Well, challenges, there are so many different challenges that we face, and we think sometimes they feel sort of insurmountable. But when we look at opportunity, and we do have some solutions, and the solutions they start right here in this room. And the solutions, most importantly, begin with all of these assets. The assets of our children, the assets of the multilingual individuals that we have in your state, but we also have some incredible pieces of power that we can put together, and we can link them together. But they have to be connected, and they get connected through documentation. And I've heard bits and pieces of all of that today. And so that's what I'd like to tie together for you, and I hope maybe like a little package with a pretty bow. And so let's start talking about the people of Hawaii and some of the, and we start talking about them as assets first, as people that have linguistic needs. And what are some of those needs? And just a lot of what I'm going to share is really just sort of summary of what's already been stated today. Because some of the people have those judicial language needs. They need translators. They need advocates. They need judicial support. They need information about what's available to them. They need an understanding of the law that may, in fact, be different here than it was in a space where they may have come from. They need safety. They need to understand not just the laws, but some of the policies. They need protection. They need to know what are procedures when I have an issue or when I have a problem. They need not just medical help when there is an emergency, but they need daily care. They need to understand about immunizations. They need to know about physical and checkups. They need to know what does my child need to be able medically to get into school. What about health care? What about diabetes? What about insurance? What about forms? All of these things are just daily pieces that many of us take for granted that become challenging when you have these linguistic obstacles. What about enrolling my child in school? What kind of paperwork? What if I don't have school records? What if those records are in a language the school doesn't understand? All of these become challenges that, if we want to serve a community, need support. And these are people with translation needs. And so as a community, how do we then meet those needs? How do we serve our community? And some of these things can't be met any other way but through language support. And so when we start to think about that, that's one of our needs. So we have the need to meet through the people need. But our businesses also have needs for languages. And we heard pieces of that came out in different ways. And whether it was through some of the business needs, through the needs for employees, the need for expansion. I heard messages about some of the businesses that could have maximized if they'd had more language opportunities. Well, this is some interesting data that some of you may want to find out more about. This was a research piece that was funded through Pearson and ACTFL this past summer. And they hired EPOS, who did a very large study. They interviewed and did surveys of 1,200 different US companies over a number of different sectors of business. And they did small, mid-sized, and large companies. And after this, they kind of compiled all of this, and we're going to look at some of the data. But they found some very big pieces of information, and these are 5 major pieces that they discovered. First, that 9 out of the 10 employers said they rely on employees with language skills other than English. And we heard about some of these pieces just this morning. And many of these people who they relied upon were not being paid to do that. We heard about from one of the panelists this morning about the person who happened to be a janitor who came up to help with labor and delivery. That person, they're not being paid additional for that. We heard, somebody that happens to speak Chinese that was brought in to assist someone. And so oftentimes someone's being asked to serve as a language translator in maybe in a nominal way. It's not, it's not contract work. It's not high difficulty in terms of what maybe the language is, but for the person who they're supporting and helping, it's highly important. And so employers are relying on someone and not necessarily realizing the value of that person's contribution. 56% of employers said that foreign language demand will increase in the next 5 years. In fact, the language translation is one of the top 5 growing industries in terms of job careers at the moment. 47% stated a need for language skills exclusively, and this is always surprising, for the domestic market. A lot of times students studying a world language, they go, well, I'm never going to travel, so I don't really need it. Because they think of it as something for the international space, and they don't realize that it's needed here in the domestic space. Well, I think anyone who spends very much time, maybe an hour in Honolulu, realizes it's needed in the domestic space. 1 in 3 language-dependent U.S. employers reported a language skills gap. In other words, we need somebody. What are we going to do? I spoke to an employer from Michigan when I was in D.C. meeting with Small Businessmen's Association, and they had just landed a very large contract with a supplier in Quebec. And they said, I need an accountant that can handle some supply and demand and orders, but can also speak French. I don't need a translator, I just need somebody who can speak French like when they talk to them on the phone. And that's oftentimes what a business person needs. 1 in 4 said they lost business due to a lack of language skills. And so these become critical for business, the business world, is the importance of language lost. And when we get into the actual specifics, these might surprise you even more. Because the top 5 departments within these companies where language skills were most needed, the number 1 was customer service. It's the person-to-person customer interaction where language was most needed. It was the waiter or the waitress. It was the customer service representative. It was the person filling the phone order. It was the person who was making the appointment. It was the person who was helping them fill out the mortgage form. It was in sales. It was in marketing. It was in IT, trying to figure out how to use my new phone. And so we need to think about, at the business level, how, if we're trying to work with getting support for language education, if we're working on getting support for language initiatives and language services to our community, it is exactly our community to whom they most benefit. And so we need to think about when we're looking at the banker, it's the person who needs to fill out the home application form for a loan or for a mortgage or for a car loan. It's the person selling the car to them that might need help. And so that when they go to the DMV to take their driver's license test and learn the rules of the road and get apply for their driver's license plate, that they begin to have those kind of language interactions. And we think about those kinds of pieces, that's when language becomes important. So it isn't just, when we look at those interactions, it becomes not just government, but it is also at the business level. And it becomes personal. And so think about if we market language, language is, in fact, an asset. And so we have to take away the shame of talking about dollars and cents. Because dollars and cents matter to 2 people who actually make things happen. All right, I'm a teacher. In fact, in my new role as executive director, I keep telling my husband, these shoes are too big for me to fill. I feel like I'm a high school classroom teacher. And I will always be that somewhere in my heart. I miss my students dearly. And high school teachers, people in education, we feel very uncomfortable asking for money. We like to do things for free. That's who we are. We share. And we want to collaborate. And we have big hearts. But I was told once in D.C. when I was working with advocacy on the Hill, that people who make policy, they might have a big heart, and they might be altruistically in favor of a bill, but they need to know the dollars and cents of how much it's going to cost before they can ask for it or sign off on it. Because there's always a bottom line, and we need to be able to speak to the bottom line. And so we need to do that. And so let's talk about the bottom line for Hawaii. When you think about your economic assets and you look at your trade partners, where does language make a difference? Well, these are some of the big pieces for Hawaii in terms of your trade. These are some of your big export pieces: agriculture, military. In fact, the military pieces or the military value, it's something like $15 million, and 100,000 jobs in Hawaii is what I found. Shipping, petroleum products, surprisingly. But these are your big trade partners. In millions of dollars, it's $222 million for Korea. South Korea is your biggest trade partner, according to these 2016 statistics. And you see Singapore. How many of you knew that the Netherlands was one of your biggest trade partners? Big surprise. In fact, German is one of your big languages in terms, it's your biggest European language. There's a couple of other surprises you might have coming, actually. But we begin to look at this. Well, this might be important when we think about who is it that we're going to ask or look at for trade partners. And we think about these pieces become then our economic assets. These are the things that we want to think about when we talk about who do we go to find support? Who can we lobby with? Who can support us for language credentialing? The same thing as tourism. You all know that tourism is valuable to your state. It's your biggest asset because instead of most states look at like how can we export? How can we get more exports? For Hawaii, it's what about our import? It's your import of tourism. Look at the number of days here on Oahu. You had over almost 5.5 million tourist days in 2016, and that number probably is higher each year. That's a huge economic value. Almost half of those tourists were international tourists. The 2017 data said that brought your state almost $17 billion, almost $2 billion of tax revenue, and over 9 million visitors. Of those tourists, this may not surprise you, over $3 billion of that was from Japanese tourists. It's your number one group. China is a growing group. And interesting about the Chinese group is they spend the most per group of any tourist group. Of any of your top 10 tourist groups, they spend the most per day. And that's a value, something, even though they may not be the greatest number, that they spend a lot per day. So when you look at, well, what languages should we invest in if we're thinking about things for tourists, these are the numbers that you want to look at. And that becomes an important asset when you think about what do we do with language for our state. Your educational assets are also really important. When we talked about your K-12 programs in 11 languages. You have great dual language programs, and dual language programs have the incredible value of being able to take a student to a really high level of proficiency by the time they graduate. Community college programs that can focus not just on language, but also on college and on career-specific languages are really important. Your university system. You also have another educational asset. You have multilingual residents who already have career skills or are already in careers. That's another kind of language asset that's educational that you might not have even thought about. You don't necessarily have to grow your own, a lawyer who speaks Malaysian. You may already have a number of them. But there's another group that has an incredible value to you here, and it was a part of your 2013 Language Roadmap Initiative, and that was what will you do to attract and then keep international students? And so your international students contributed in 2016, this may surprise you, over $300 million to your state economy. $300 million to your state economy. 40% of those international students were from Japan. These are your top 5 countries where international students come from. Is anyone surprised by Switzerland? I was. And those students spend an average about $25,000 a year here. So this is something that, again, thinking about what you're doing within your state in terms of your language economy, this is important information that can help you start to strategize and to plan. What kinds of language credentials can support, and programs can support this kind of growth. So if I'm going to advertise as a university, Where might I want to place my advertisements? What kinds of programs are these students taking? What kinds of careers are these students pursuing? Who are the companies that I might want to connect these students to? Where would these students work? And so when we think about those community solutions, they can become really, really exciting because there is a lot we can do, and that's what I want to begin to share with you. So if we go back to your own 2013 roadmap. You suggested in that roadmap that, and this is brilliant because this is what I want to do, is to create a database, a web portal of your language resources, your skill set, the individuals in your state that have language skills, and couple them maybe with what they do. And to begin training people. So if I have this level of language, I train them maybe to get to this level of language. That you do state testing so you can find out what the level of language individuals in your state have. That you do some credentialing, especially in the area of those where a higher level of skill is not only needed, but required, for example, in the judicial area when you need to have licensed translators. And you talked in that document about having entry-level functional fluency levels. You talked about and can celebrate your high school level with your Hawai'i Seal of Biliteracy. And that program you have achieved and achieved it well, and it's going to continue to grow. Those students are going to be ready to take on some skills now. They're going to be able to do those entry-level pieces that were talked about today. They're going to be able to do some of those tasks that our panelists said were needed. Increasing high school dual language credit programs is another way to do that, especially if they're in career-specific areas. To look at some work-ready levels of language, to begin to do content work and career work in the college level setting at language levels is another way to meet the needs of the community that were discussed this morning. But there's more that you can do, and there's more that's going to be needed at higher levels of language skill than what the K-12 market can meet. And that's where the Global Seal of Biliteracy can begin to support Hawaii. And we can do that because the Global Seal of Biliteracy is designed to certify a bilingual or a multilingual of any age who can meet our test criteria. This is a map that shows where the Global Seal of Biliteracy currently has issued awards. So if it's a green state, that's a state where we've issued awards. We issued our inaugural awards just almost, not quite, in a few days, 1 year ago at ACTFL conference, the American Conference on the Teaching of Foreign Languages last year in New Orleans. We did 3 different inaugural pilot schools and then began online awards in January of this year. So not even a year later, we've already done 42 states. We've also issued awards in collaboration with the Department of Education in Mexico. We did that this summer. You'll see that applications have been received from schools or organizations or companies in 4 states that are coded in yellow, as well as Canada and Japan. And so it's really exciting because what it has done is it's affirmed that the idea of creating a language credential is important. So I want to kind of just start with just a little description of what is the difference between just what has the incredible award that the Seal of Biliteracy is and how I view kind of the Global Seal of Biliteracy. That they are both equally important. They are similar, but there is just maybe a little bit of a difference in focus. The Seal of Biliteracy has been designed to recognize and celebrate a high school language learner at the end of their high school language learning years as part of that sort of celebration at the graduation point. It's generally issued to students in a public school, although there are some states that allow for other students to qualify. So it's usually issued at their senior year, sometime around graduation. In most states, students have to take a test, but not all states. Each state sets its own criteria and has its own qualifications. It's not anything that a university student or an adult would participate in. The Global Seal saw some gaps in that, but also some brilliance. The idea that someone could receive a document or a certification or a credential for their language is not something we've ever done in the United States. And it's something that's long overdue. Because as you can see, just based on the discussion that took place here this morning, the need to identify people with language skills is really needed to serve populations in different communities for a number of different reasons. And so we saw that. And as an advocate for the state seals of biliteracy, I was receiving calls, why can't my kid get it? I'm a university student and I want to get this. I'm an adult and I have these skills and I would like to have something to be able to put on my resume. What can I do? And so we just began to look at all of these different places where language learning had taken place but wasn't able to be recognized. And so from all of this sort of frustration, the Global Seal was born as a solution and a gap filler. And so what it does is it takes that concept and says, let's make that a broader opportunity as a way to do two things: recognize, celebrate, and document an individual's language skills, but do it through qualified testing, and then provide them with a document that does two things. It articulates their level of skill, and then provides them with a document that an employer or an academic institution can verify and recognize because it's aligned to that ACFL scale, and create basically a meta-credential that everyone can understand and is consistent universally. And so that's what we did. And currently, these are all of the languages that we now can certify. We presently have 105 different languages, and we can credential all of the languages that Hawaii is now representing. So that's pretty exciting. We're adding 9 new languages next spring, so that will take that to almost 120 different languages. And there may be more that we'll hear about. So, and we do this through a cadre of tests that have been approved through an independent board of advisors. And we have 3 different levels of fluency, which I'll describe in a few minutes. The process for receiving a Global Seal of Biliteracy is a fairly simple online process. So the first part of the process is, at this point in time, we do this through an organization, through a school, through an agency, or through a company. So at this point, an individual does not do this for themselves. So at this point, we're using through a third party. So if a company for example, a couple of weeks ago, we had a bank apply for their employees, or we work through a school district, or we work through a government organization. For example, we did a county sheriff's department in Oregon not too long ago. And so the company or the organization or the school will apply online and just provide us with they're basically, here's our contact information, this is the languages that we're going to test in, this is the test we're going to use, and when we're going to test. Provide us with some basic information. And this process is completely free. There is no cost to doing that process. They complete the online application. And they can award that, do that process. So these are just some of the kinds of groups of people that we have worked with so far. High schools, that's probably about half of the numbers of the groups that we are working with the Global Seal. Community colleges and universities make about 25%. That's especially important to students who want to have language documentation on their resumes or on their CVs for work. Oftentimes, a college student is going to have their, they'll fill out that job application. It's going to have their university, and the HR, Human Resources Department, is going to look at their application. They're going to see where they graduated from. They're going to see their major or their minor, and they're not going to look at a transcript. And they won't have any idea that this person has language skills. But by having it as a credential, it actually goes in a certification and credential area, and they will actually be recognized then for their skills. Public safety and service agencies, banks, hospitals is one that is starting to grow with us. Schools, just worked with Dallas Public School District for their teachers and staff, chambers of commerce, and some businesses. So who is receiving? Who are the individuals? Anyone who has acquired listening, speaking, reading, and writing skills in 2 or more languages. It doesn't matter where they got the language. These are competency-based tests, so they don't have to take a class. They may already have the skill. So maybe they learned it at home, at school, in the military, through a work experience, sort of on the job, online classes, or maybe they were self-taught. Someone who could show the evidence of their first language, and then they can take the qualifying test in their second language. And I'm actually announcing today, until about 2 hours ago, there were only 2 levels for the Global Seal of Biliteracy, but about 2 hours ago, the office posted our 3rd level, which is the highest of our 3 levels. So our first level we call functional fluency. Do I have language people in the room that are like language educators? So you would know this term intermediate mid, right? Intermediate mid. Do I see any head nods? A few? Well, people in the business world, do I have any business world people in here? Do you know what intermediate mid is? No idea. So if someone comes and says, well, I'm intermediate mid, you're like, that's nice. I have no idea what that means. But we talk about, we need to have layman's terms so that communicates. And so we actually are using the word functional fluency. In other words, because a lot of times someone will say, well, are you fluent? I get that question. Well, what does that mean? I'm a language person. I would never say I would be nervous about saying I'm fluent because I know all the things I don't know. But my husband thinks I sound pretty good when I travel. And so we've tried to qualify that idea of fluency. So someone who's functionally fluent can get by. It might not be pretty. They might not always use the best word, but they can survive a situation. And oftentimes, that's exactly the level of language we heard this morning was required. Someone who is functionally fluent. It's entry level. It's what your Hawai'i Seal of Biliteracy students could do. They're functionally fluent. The next level we recognize we call working fluency. That's at advanced low on the ACTFL scale. This is the level at which, for example, the CAPE would certify a language teacher. So that kind of gives you that sort of comparison. It is someone who's able to work on an everyday basis in a language so that they're capable of doing a number of different tasks at a much higher level. And then we have professional fluency. This is someone who's really highly proficient. And so we have these 3 levels because it depends on the job, what kind of level of language you need. So if I'm an employer, I might need something different, and maybe I could identify which level I'm going to require. So how is a candidate tested? We use a qualifying test that is rated according to those specific kinds of levels. And so our website lists the different tests. It has links to the test companies. The test companies have samples, so someone could find out what the test looks like, and there's contacts to the different test companies. So, but we don't pay for tests. We don't give the tests. We just provide the contact information. And we accept a test that's up to 12 months old, no more than that. Then the school or the company would fill out a candidate form and provide us with the list or the roster as well as a copy of those original test scores. And then we provide for free a certificate. And that certificate is serial numbered and transcribable. All of that process is completely free. The only thing we charge for are a few recognition items if they are desired, but they're optional, and I'll explain those just in a minute. So if we want to think about creating a multilingual constituency, if we want to create an opportunity where you have a way to show a number of different levels of language skill or a linguistic database, these are those three pieces. Those green boxes represent that actful scale of language proficiency that I mentioned a little bit earlier. At that lower level, that intermediate mid, our first level of recognition, that is the same level as your state seal of biliteracy. So someone could have that state seal of biliteracy. If they missed that opportunity as a high school student, they could still come in at that entry level with a global seal much later, maybe as a college student or as an adult, and not miss out on leveling up and continuing that process. A high school student with a Hawai'i state seal of biliteracy could level up in college and receive a higher level and continue a language journey. And so the idea is that you would be, as an employer, maybe I just need someone who could do that customer service. Maybe they're going to be a receptionist and they're going to just be able to make appointments, or they're going to be the hotel clerk and do their, to be able to get someone in and out of the room. Someone at the functional fluency would be able to do that task. Maybe I need to do a customer service call and do something at a little higher level, like what happened, or handle something that's a little bit more problematic. Maybe someone who is lost and can't, or trying to do a police report. That might be something a little more complicated, and I want someone who has working fluency. And so now, if I'm serving the community, I can do something a little more complicated. And so depending upon the level of skill required, they would be able to pick the kind of level that they needed. And this is a nicer way of certainly recognizing skill, and also for the person who's taking the test, it's not a pass or fail, it's just where are you in the continuum. Then we want to recognize whatever skill level that you have. And what the recipient who takes that test, who takes that risk to find out what their level of skill, they would receive a certificate. And the certificate will have the name of the school or organization or agency that provided the service, that tested them. That's, again, at no cost, although the testing cost is not included. The serial number includes the level. The serial number includes the country in which it was issued, as well as the languages that were awarded to that person. You can also see that there is a little bit of swag available if you want to provide some extra celebration, including 2 medals for the 2 lower levels and lapel pins for the 2 upper levels that are a little bit more professional. What's also really kind of exciting for the awardees are these 2 pieces here that we have the idea of to make it even more professional, or certainly more helpful to the candidate, is that they have the option of adding their Global Seal of Biliteracy to LinkedIn. Because it is serial numbered, it can go in under licenses and credentials on LinkedIn. So on this particular piece, this is a young lady. She's at Cornell University. She got her Global Seal of Biliteracy at the functional fluency in Chinese and at the working fluency in Spanish, and she's entered both of them onto her LinkedIn profile page. And there is actually, we have a video on our website of how to do it. It's very, very simple, because you just put in that serial number and there it goes. It just pops right in. So what we do is we think about the idea of maximizing opportunity for both the community as well as the individual, because it adds value to the skills of the person, but it also adds value to the language programs that are happening in your community. It becomes this universal meta-credential. And it provides recipients, if they choose, with the option that all Global Seal recipients have, which is optional college credit for their seal, which for an adult might be something that would be very, very attractive if they've not had an opportunity to do that before. It's a way to identify critical language resources. So if you have an opportunity to be able to provide testing, this might be a way to get some of those people to that are hiding in the woodwork that you didn't know they had language skills. We heard a little bit of that this morning as well. This might be a great way to do that. And it certainly is a neat way to sort of celebrate the cultural diversity of your community. For the last 2 weeks prior to this particular trip, I was in China. And I had the opportunity to attend the second annual China International Import Expo. They invited 180 countries to demonstrate, sort of have this kind of Epcot Center, show us your country, what do you want our China to buy from you? And so each country brought the best of what they want China to import. And I have never seen anything so amazing in my life. And each country, and in the case of the United States, 14 different states, brought what they wanted China to buy. And I happened to be there with the Utah delegation, who was selling to China a number of different products that they make, some agricultural pieces, but they were also selling their state parks, and they were for tourism, and they were selling the fact that they have 14,000 students taking Chinese in their K-12 dual language immersion programs. And that was a pretty interesting thing for the Chinese to hear. But what was really exciting was that concept of, and China was telling everyone, and on these different panel discussions, that they have this incredibly huge, large, booming economy that wants to buy what the West wants to sell, to the tune of $2 trillion. And I started thinking about, well, I'm going to be in Hawaii. I wonder what Hawaii would want to have. What would you want to sell? What would you want to promote? What, if you were the tourist, if you were going to show off, what is it that you would want them to see? And I started thinking about that as kind of a filter. And so if I came back to that report, that business report that was done by Ackful and Pearson, and this is what they did. They said, this is what businesses needed to do. This is what businesses said should be done. First of all, conduct a need analysis. You've already begun to do that this morning. Then they said the next thing businesses should do is conduct an outside, not internal, but an outside language testing and assessment. Find out what languages are in your company and test people. Then make an inventory of your company's linguistic competencies. And then being strategic when you are in the recruiting process to kind of fill in your language gaps. And then if you have some language people that have a little bit of language, start training them to level up and cultivate a pipeline of language candidates. Now think about that, not as a business, think about that as a state. If this is what businesses, 1,200 of them, have decided as a plan, as a business plan, what can you do that as a state? So when they put this, and I have a link to this, then I know Dina's going to be posting this presentation, and there's the link to all of these pieces here. Think about, and so this will all be posted with all of the links so you can get to this report. But they also put, and there's lots of data in here, but these are the different pieces where all of this data came in. These are the different areas of business where they found this to be the most true. The green is, this was where they really relied on languages. The purple is where they relied on languages some to like 50% of the time. The blue is not very much at all. Construction was a big one. In fact, it was the biggest. Languages. Who knew? Manufacturing was also big. Healthcare and social assistance was number 2. Number 3, technical services. That goes back to that whole IT piece again. And so we see those, and when we look at that, again, those were big pieces where we look at, well, that's where we need to look at how do we investing in our pieces. So if we come back to where was our own need analysis, everything that we talked about this morning, court interpreters, advocates in the medical field. Well, thinking about health and intake forms, those are things that the functionally fluent person can do. Insurance, Questionnaires, those are things we might need working fluency because there's a little bit more back and forth and we might not quite sure what the response is. They might need a little bit more nuance to that. We might need a little bit more background information, that sort of past story. Assistance with filling out routine school registration and paperwork, that might be something, again, something that more of the functionally fluent might be able to do. We think about safety, general safety in the workplace or in construction or in manufacturing. Think about what those language needs look like in your community. Oftentimes, it's about signage. Signage is an important part of a linguistic community. Sometimes it's about general safety. Sometimes it's about workplace safety. And we think about where are those partnerships? Those partnerships might be in your university career and tech areas. They might be with your in your dual language programs or with your in your high school upper level and AP type programs where you can do project-based learning and actually connect those students with content-based courses in areas where they're actually interested. And actually create and work together with the Department of Education and the Department of Transportation to create company or factory signage. This is a really kind of interesting piece when you start to think about how would you welcome people to your community. I mentioned the Netherlands. In the Netherlands, when you drive across the border, this is what you would see. You would see a welcome sign in 4 different languages. Well, when you fly into Hawaii, you see welcome. I looked at your 5 different signs from some of your trade partners and their airports. So one of them was Canada, China, Japan. These are some of the signs in your trade partner airports. They're all multilingual. I read an article about by a company, it happened to be related to China, and was talking about the experience of the Chinese landing in any U.S. airport and how difficult it was for them to manage finding where baggage was, making a transfer, finding how to get to ground transportation, that it was very difficult to navigate those kinds of situations. And so that many of them either chose not to travel or they chose to buy a package deal with a company that would deal with just their group because they would be basically handled from spot 1 to spot 2. And I watched that actually this week as I came in on Saturday and watched groups as a whole group being handled in just that way because it's too difficult to be an independent traveler without language. And so my question then to you is, how do you say aloha to someone from somewhere else? And I saw a little bit of that. Actually, your hop-on, hop-off buses are actually, pretty welcoming to a particular group of your international visitors. And if you notice, those international visitors, these buses were full of Japanese guests. And I don't even wonder why. I was staying at the New Otani Hotel, which has lots of Japanese signage. It has Japanese menus. I had Japanese instructions to what to do with my wet towels in the bathroom. And the hotel was full of Japanese. There's a reason. And so when you begin to open up the idea to be creative, who else might you want? Well, if the Chinese tourists are going to pay more per day than anyone else, so my question might be, what else would you do to say aloha? How about parks and recreational signs? What about menus? What about tours and tour brochures? I mentioned earlier the state of Utah. The state of Utah is doing something really interesting. In their 6 national parks, they're partnering their dual language students up as tour guides in the summer. What a great experience for the students that are in those dual language programs, but what a great experience for the visitors, maybe from Japan or from China or from South America, who have a blonde, blue-eyed person speaking wonderful language to them and showing them their national park. When we think about the language roadmap, one of the things it talks about is workforce development and what can you do to work on that infrastructure in your institutions. And one of those pieces was talked about was how do you handle the need for interpreters when there aren't enough around. And one of those advantages might be that person who is can do it at least remotely, that can't get to every hospital. There are some solutions. That in-person is the best, but maybe that in-person on video could be a solution. And so there are ways to look at how do we create that option. But again, it starts with identifying who those people are. And I want to share with you just a couple of creative solutions that might change your import of tourist situation. And that is something else that was mentioned in your roadmap and is actually working in a process that I'm working on with the Chamber of Commerce right now. And that's the idea of a multilingual visitor-facing software. I'm going to just call it the magic of a QR code. Everyone knows what those QR codes are. So think about the idea of having, we're working with the Chamber of Commerce right now in Eugene, Oregon. They are hosting the 2021 World Track and Field Championships. And so the stores are actually, the businesses and the Chamber of Commerce are actually working with community individuals. They have a goal of 1,000 to have 1,000 people get their Global Seals of Biliteracy in all different languages. They happen to be a university campus, so they have lots of different people there. And the goal then is in businesses to have their Global Seal of Biliteracy decal in the window with a QR code. And the person can scan the QR code and find out what language is spoken there. But they can also have a map with a QR code that's just going to that scans their language, and they'll be able to very quickly identify any hotel or restaurant or store that has someone there that speaks their language. It's a very, very simple, actually somewhat low-tech way of solving a very, very big problem. This would get someone to a phone call, it can get them to a phone with, to be able to connect with someone through a video, sort of FaceTime, Skype type call with someone that speaks their language for an immediate translator that's just done right through their small community in the Chamber of Commerce. So really easy, kind of quick tech way to get a taxi or whatever it is. They want to find a Lyft or Uber driver that speaks their language. And this can be used in all different things like the historic sites, points of interest, all different ways to do that. So finally, just kind of closing, think about who are those sort of cultural navigators, those functional fluency people that can help someone through those sort of immediate situations that might be able to be on your little QR code app. And think about how can you kind of create that sort of database that can identify them through their language, by their proficiency level, maybe through a career area that they might be able to be supportive in, provide a geographic profile, what island are they on, what city, what geographic area of the city, and through those language credentials, be able to solve and provide some great community solutions. Thank you.